There's a new React framework in town, and it's called One. In this episode, I interview Nate Wienert, One's lead developer. Now, this conversation moves fast, so let me prepare you. One is unique because it supports doing both React and React Native in the same project, so you can share a lot of code and configuration between these two. Now, One has file-based routing, and it supports doing static generation, server-side generation, and traditional SPAs. One also includes Tamagui, which is their React styling system that supports both web and mobile. Now, we also talk about Zero, which is a companion project that's coming soon. Zero is interesting because Zero will feel very familiar to native developers. In native development, you usually have a local database, and One is going to try to simulate that sort of thing for a client-side development experience. So it's going to do smart sync and caching along the way, and it works with PostgreSQL. It's optional, but related to our conversation, so you'll hear us discuss it in detail. And with that, let's dive in. Nate, let's just jump right in with, I think the big question is, why One? There's a lot of frameworks out here. What makes One special?
Yeah. So I think it's a super valid question. Just because, I agree with you. I think I even tried to poke fun at that with my intro video that we made about it. We kind of say, like yet another framework, you may be wondering why we need that. And unfortunately, I think it has a little bit of a buildup, but I think I can maybe do it a little bit clearer than I've done in the past now, which is just to split it into two parts. The first part is that I'm coming from someone who came into React Native and saw a lot of complexity. And then a part of sort of tackling that complexity was this pandemic project I had, which was kind of building an app that bridged web and native. It was kind of like a food sharing review, kind of like local. So it had this like really strong need for like search and native. So it had this strong need. I played with Swift UI early on. Eventually, just felt like Swift UI was pretty early. This was like three or 4 years ago. And then I actually came into React Native, and I thought React Native felt really nice. Dev experience was really much better, debugging and kind of hot reloading and all this stuff. But I did find that sort of like the on the styling side, it was just lacking so much from the web. Like if you're used to CSS or even CSS and JS, it was just like way behind. And then once you did abstract that, it was way slower. So I spent all this time on Tamagui basically, trying to solve that in a deep way. And I think we did. And I think we did a really good job of kind of like deeply solving like SSR, light and dark mode, media queries, container queries, like pseudo styles, like compiling to CSS, doing it in a way that's like actually, SSR safe and hydrates properly, and animation drivers. Like there's so much going on there that I think is really cool. And I think we really solved it in a deep way. But then I sort of like, we built this takeout starter kit that had Next.js glued to a React Native app essentially. And it was just like, it was cool. And we spent a lot of time trying to develop it out, but it was just full of complexity. I mean, just completely insane amounts of complexity, I think, in terms of just having two different bundlers, routers, sets of documentation, types, plugin interfaces for your bundlers, like two different ways to configure your path imports, and it was just kind of crazy, like the amount of complexity that captured, even though I felt like we were doing the best we could. And so that was sort of the genesis of just the React Native side. Was kind of like, well, I think it would be such a huge breakthrough to simplify that. And part of that was an experiment with Vite, because Metro, it's a very meta, I guess, Facebook focused project. They've very much catered to Facebook's need over the years. They just started sort of getting into web support, but it's been a very slow process. And I mean, even up until very, very recent, they were lacking like things that I think most web developers would consider to be not just like nice, but kind of must-haves, like bundle splitting properly. I think a friend of ours has an app actually that they it's funny, they left takeout. I have like my grievances, but they left takeout to use just to go ahead and use like Metro for everything, like a full stack thing, and they left it because we had like this 50 kilobytes of JavaScript that we had in the bundle for our themes that normally we tree shake out. That's extra 50 kilobytes on top of the normal Tamagui and everything. But like it was an extra 50, and they complained about it. I spent like a few days trying to fix it because it wasn't supposed to be there. I fixed it, and then they left, and they're a good friend of mine, so I have no grievances there anymore. But they did leave and use Metro instead. But the problem is now they have a 10 megabyte JavaScript bundle because it just doesn't support tree shaking properly and stuff. So it was kind of funny. I was, giving him shit for that. But needless to say, like I think Metro has just been very slow on a lot of web features, and it's also just it uses Babel. And I just think Vite, if you just look at the upsides of Vite, it's crazy how many there are. I mean, the community is so strong. The plugin interface that I've worked with, like I built, plugins for Webpack and Metro and Babel and all these different interfaces. And when I did the Vite plugin, I was blown away at how nice it is. Like you just have such almost like perfect API surfaces. I'm very bullish on like TypeScript as the main bundler interface, but then like having SWC to be fast instead of Babel for the actual compile stage. I feel like that gives you this really nice balance of kind of like flexibility, but also speed. And then you just have like, I mean, so many like other things, just so many people using it, the docs, the JS doc, the types, everything. Just, I think V8 is just an amazing bundler that by itself kind of makes the case. But to touch a little bit more on that, like I think part of it too is you may say, well, Expo Router exists. They built sort of a similar thing. In fact, we, to give credit where credit's due, we did. Originally, before we built one, we built VXRN, which was like the thing that makes Vite able to serve React Native, which was a ton of work. And then we sort of took Expo Router as an experiment to see if we can make it, make all these other things that we would need to work. And that experiment went really well. Actually, I think it took a long time of like making, it was mostly bundler related work, like getting Vite to support all these different features and all these different like types of things. And then we sort of like proved that out. And then we sort of like refactored a lot of stuff. We slimmed out, took out a lot of things. We sort of added a bunch of things. I think at this point you can say that like the amount of Expo Router that one encapsulates is actually not a lot. Like I think the vast majority of the work is either other libraries, our own work, and then there's I want to give credit where credit's due. There's like this portion of the file system routing that is the same, but yeah. So like I just want to make sure that that's clear, and also I think that's the main comparable is something like Expo Router. Like why? There's only one other thing that I think does this bridging of native and web, and I think the main difference there is Vite versus Metro. And I think like I just am huge on Vite. I think Vite is amazing, and it does a really amazing job. And then I think the second piece that even that by itself, I think I would have been very hesitant to kind of release that. Like again, you can argue that that's maybe a bit marginal or doesn't really do much, but I do think that the local first and the zero integration that I talked about a bit in the video is really where things become very interesting and much, much different than I think most of the React frameworks are taking in terms of a stance and a long-term vision for how we build apps and websites. And just to touch on that in like a minute, hopefully, I do think that like I saw this trend of server components coming out, and I really felt like while they're good at some things, especially maybe more like static web pages that need this optimization, having the router be on the server side and having all that extra complexity of dealing with server boundaries and server, like, passing things and almost like colored trees of like this area can go here and this can't go there. And like, I just saw there's so much complexity there. And then Next.js adopted it, and Remix seems to be adopting it in part. I'm not sure what they'll do with it, but a lot of these React frameworks are going all into it. And I've just been such a big proponent for a long time of these sort of local first type libraries, where you basically just try and like, parse maybe on native. And again, coming from the native perspective, like native apps really need this. Like you can't have an interaction that doesn't mutate instantly. And so these client-side databases are kind of table stakes for native apps, but they can do it because they don't care about bundle size. But most of the time the web doesn't use them because the web, a lot of these local first libraries use like SQLite JS or something like that, which is like a megabyte. You just can't. I mean, if you're a web developer, you just like, if anyone tries to add a dependency over like 200 kilobytes, let alone 1 megabyte, you're like, sorry guys, we're going to have to like, this is going to be the biggest bundle biggest dependency in our bundle by far. And Zero, I think, is for the first time really capturing a few attributes that I think will be the key to make it viable to be a web first thing, not just even for apps, but also even I think for websites. Like I think even just a website, it'd be so fun to write it with Zero because I think the developer experience is so high quality, and they just run on Postgres. So that was another thing that I think a lot of past attempts failed at. Like if you look at Meteor on Mongo, RethinkDB on its own database engine, PouchDB on CouchDB, they all had weird databases or weird constraints on your data model, but Zero just works with Postgres. It works with your existing schema. They've done from scratch lightweight like layer on top of that essentially for the client side database, but it is just basically like very light and very close to SQL, which I think is very cool. You can do subqueries, I think, too, which solves like waterfalls. So I went over a minute. I could go like 10 more minutes on Zero because I think it's that cool. But like, yeah, I do think that these two factors really play together nicely too, which is kind of what's cool about one is that we're solving two things that I think complement each other very well and are unique and that make it so that shared code is much more viable, cross-platform is much more viable, but also I think it's just a really great way to build anything, even if you're just React only. Like I really do think that if you're just building a website, you're gonna have a lot of fun, I think, and that's another thing that I think I want to try and do is focus on simplicity and kind of like bringing this ethos of like simple and effective and kind of like fun to work with. So that's my spiel.
Okay, so you covered so many different things, and a lot of that stuff, if somebody's just coming in and they don't know one at all, they're going to wonder about a lot of that jargon. So let me back up, and this will be a fun thing for me. Sure. I've known about one since you did your announcement, and your announcement was just a few days ago. So I've only gotten to tinker with it a little bit, but I'm going to try to catch people up here with a little bit of this jargon, and then you hold me accountable if I say anything incorrect. So a couple things. Yeah. One thing is you talked about Zero. Zero is coming, but it's not here yet. Zero is something that will be added to one, and it will allow us to have basically a local first experience. It will give us extremely
Also, by the way,
fast.
I found out that there's a third rail of local first. Local first was a manifesto that encapsulates a bunch of things, and I guess like Zero does most of it, but doesn't do all of it. So anyway, I just want you to step on it too. I try and say local first it's client-side. It's a client-side database with a sync engine that does like, sort of like local database type thing.
But now you've got me too curious. Help me understand this third rail. What am I potentially missing when we talk about local first here?
I didn't even know it was such a contentious thing because actually I saw so many people calling Zero local first. Actually, a lot of people do call it that. I think in general, and I think it's fine. Honestly, my opinion is that it's not a big deal, but there is a manifesto that was written by Ink and Switch, which was like, and it's by two people, I believe. I wish I had their names off the top of my head. Again, I am more of a front-end developer who is just loves this technology, but isn't like steeped in it. And I'm not building Zero, obviously. So, but I will say that paper is very cool. I read it back when it came out. It came out in 2019. And because I was geeking out about Rethink, and all this stuff and Meteor since forever. So I've always been following this sort of area, but I think they coined that term in 2019. And part of what they coined it was like, there was this whole part about users' control of data. Like your data for your app should live on your computer. You should be able to eject it. You should be able to control your own data. I think there was a lot of this like anti sort of cloud rhetoric. And where Zero diverges a little bit is they're focusing a bit on, they're sort of being, I think, somewhat practical in that they're explicitly not supporting off the bat, and they want to support it in the long run, but they're not supporting it in V1, which is this idea of you can go offline for like an extended period of time, come back online, do a bunch of editing offline, come back online and have it sync without solving all the conflicts, right, of your data and making sure that it syncs properly. So they know how to do that. They plan to do it. But in order to, they're already doing so much, right? Like, I think that's pretty rational that they're saying like that extended offline mutations that sync when you come back online, we're not going to solve that in V1. It'll mostly require an internet connection. Obviously, there could be some blips here and there, but we're not going to like support that you're editing a note offline while you're on a train and then you come back online and it's going to, and someone else is editing too. I think even if I don't want to put words in Aaron's mouth. He always gets mad at me because evidently this is a third rail in that community. Like some people are very defensive over like, if you're going to claim this, but like, I do think that they even do support being offline as long as there's no weird syncing conflicts with someone else editing. So it's kind of this, there's a lot to it, basically. It's a whole world that I did not know. And so, yeah, actually, I'm going to plug in my computer, but go ahead. I think I can do it just in a second. Just don't want to lose battery here. Should be.
Okay. Yeah, that does sound important.
Should be just.
Let's get power going. So while you're doing that, I want to try to explain a few other pieces of jargon that you'd mentioned in here. So when you talk about one, you were talking about, okay, we've got Vite here, but we also want to be able to do React Native development, and we'd like to be able to work with Vite. And you guys built effectively a bridge that allows someone to use Vite with React Native, and that was called RX.
VXRN. Yeah.
VXRN. Sorry, VXRN.
Terrible name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that was something that you all built as well?
Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah.
that's sort of a
Yeah.
pre-existing artifact, and one builds on top of VXRN.
Yes.
Okay, but a
Exactly.
separate package and things. Okay, so that's an important piece here. Yeah, I think you spoke to one of the other big questions that I had early on when I looked at one. I said, okay, if I'm not doing React Native development, should this even be on my radar? Would there be a reason for me to do it? And it sounds like your answer is yes, correct?
Very much so. I would love. I think actually I think like it's really good at web. Like I said, I'm a web. I came from a web background. I've always been a front end developer. I grew up through JS to jQuery to Backbone to to Rail or to React, and like I really went through that whole evolution and have always been a web developer. And I only got into React Native maybe 4 years ago when I was building that project that ended up being Tamagui. And so what I think I'm trying to do is, for the most part, is to bridge these two worlds in a way where you're not sacrificing. And I think this is going to be very hard. And I do, I'm sort of resigned to my fate that if 90% of people who choose one are doing the cross-platform thing, so be it. But I'm going to do my best because I really think, I mean, we've even like fought because so React Native Web, for example, just to give you an example of why I think it is such a good web-only framework. And I would love to also get your feedback after this. Just tell me if you think it's a lost cause, if you think maybe there's some ways that maybe if you think of them off the top or not. But like, I'm curious to sort of get feedback on like how feasible this is to kind of get to it, or if it is maybe a bad idea to maybe confuse the marketing and try to do too much. But for example, like React Native Web, which is what you use if you're sharing APIs with React Native on web. I think a big problem that a lot of people have had that have tried it is that it brings along, once again, bundle size, which, again, web developers are always sensitive about this. And I think React Native Web is like pretty heavy on the bundle. Like if you include all of it, 60 gzipped, like 60 or more kilobytes, which again, once you're adding in everything else can be quite a bit for your Lighthouse score. And so what we have is this library called React Native Web Lite that I did a long time ago. And it essentially like not rewrites it, converts it to TypeScript, converts all the imports to not be circular so they can tree shake, turns on the side effects thing so that it can tree shake. It removes a bunch of stuff. It does remove like quite a few features and kind of slims it down. And it actually brings that 60, especially if you just, because like Tamagui supports CSS animation, so you don't have to do this, because they have their own animation driver. That's a huge chunk of that thing is this big JavaScript animation driver. But with Tamagui, you can actually just do CSS animations. Or if they have new libraries, Nativewind is a new library that's coming out that's trying to bridge Tailwind with Native. And so you could also do that. But the nice thing is with React Native Web Lite, I spent a lot of time before launch trying to get this all the way down, but I think it's down to like 10 kilobytes or so. Like it's really small, actually. The cost that you're paying of overhead for having this entire native compatibility is insanely small if you use that. Now, React Native Web Lite, the only way I have it set up right now is with Tamagui. If you set up Tamagui and you turn it on, you can do it yourself, but I want to make that much easier. So it's just you can just Boolean flag toggle it on. Again, this sort of talks to the difficulty of maybe speaking to web developers, but like I think our total, like the one landing page, the one site is, Tamagui by itself is like 20 some kilobytes. And then you
And
have
Nate,
like the whole.
we've talked about,
Yeah.
you've mentioned Tamagui, but we haven't actually defined it for listeners. So for those that don't know what it is,
Oh, yeah.
You want to go ahead and describe it quickly?
It's like a style library and radix, both. It's like components and a style library that are universal. So they work on web and native. Basically, that's it. It goes very deep into solving things that I think web developers expect. Like you have media queries, you even have container queries, you have pseudo hover, all these type of state styles. It really goes deep into trying to bring as many of CSS features to native, but also make it clean and easy to write, like you would if you've done like stitches. It took a lot of inspiration from stitches, styled components. It's kind of in the vein of those libraries, but it has an optimizing compiler that tries to output like really ideal optimized like CSS on web and just divs and stuff like that. So it's again, like I come from this web performance background and like I'm trying to bridge those gaps. So Tamagui solves that like deeply styling and UI shared between the platforms. And then, like this one framework is also trying to do that is basically what I'm saying. And I think we got it below 100 kilobytes of zipped JavaScript for everything, not the whole website, including actually the landing page with all the JavaScript for the landing page, all of Tamagui, all the Tamagui components, we actually bring in a huge dependency because we have a bunch of popovers and we're using floating UI, which is an amazing library, but it's like 40 kilobytes. So it eats up like half of our, because you have React DOM eating up you have React DOM and floating UI, which are eating up just by themselves, like 80% of that bundle size. But actually, like if you didn't have floating UI, you could actually get it really, really light. But yeah, we get 100, Lighthouse score pretty easily with our homepage and with room to spare. And I think that like that's what I'm trying to get out there is that it is great for web only, and it has these render modes per page too, which I think that's a really cool feature we can dive into. But no one else does that, where you can do SPA style SSG or SSR globally or per page. And I think that's really cool because like anyone coming from Create React app, you have this really nice migration path, I think, where you can do it. You can take your SPA style app, bring it to Vite, bring it into like this modern world, typed file system routing, and then you can slowly migrate to SSR just page by page if you want. So again, that's another just point that I feel like we're bringing a lot of that web experience to this kind of like new style.
Yeah, and I want to draw attention to that because I like how you guys have done that. You set a file extension like .ssr, .tsx, and now you've said, I want this to be an SSR component. So it's quite straightforward there.
You were saying about SSR. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just pointing out to people that I really like that I could incrementally do this. And it feels to me a bit like if you took a JavaScript app and you slowly moved to TypeScript, you'd go in and change it to a .ts file one at a time. Same sort of thing. I go, okay, I'm going to move one file maybe to SSR at a time or SSG, whatever I do. But I also like that you guys have this combination where I end up saying, what is my default renderer? And I set that up in my Vite config, and then I can overwrite that on a file by file basis. That's really slick.
That's awesome. I love the way, you just gave me such a good little analogy there with the TypeScript thing. Yeah, I think that actually is a really, really nice way of framing it, which is like, yeah, you can choose your default mode. Yeah. And if you're coming from Create React app, for example, which a surprising amount of people I think still are on that, you can default your app to SPA. I think also, Aaron actually pushed me to do this, the Zero founder, to keep throwing out things without context. But yeah, Aaron is the Zero founder. It's funny, he lives down the street from me in Hawaii, in a small town. So that was just random. I don't know how that serendipity happened, but
okay.
That was completely random. Like I worked at Vercel, and one of our managers there basically was like, hey, you should meet up with Aaron. He lives like right down the street from you. And
whoa, wait, I didn't know about your history at Vercel. How long ago was that? What did you do there?
Oh yeah, I worked at Vercel for like almost 2 years, a year and a half.
Okay.
That was like when I started Tamagui, so that was like 2.5, 3 years ago. And yeah, I worked on a couple teams, but I mostly worked on the preview comments team. The Vercel preview comments where you can like, what's funny is that used Replicache, which was the predecessor to Zero, the team that built this thing called Replicache. We use that for Vercel preview comments. So all sorts of lore here, but yeah, for Vercel preview comments, we use that because it has real-time commenting. It's like, it is a good example of maybe a local first style app where you have this real-time sync. You have, like data that's stored in your browser that you can, when you refresh, it's just there right away. And then it syncs. And so I think that's a really good example case of like using it. And they built that, and I worked on that team, and I just happened to live down the street from the founder of that. And then we sort of collaborated on Zero from there. Not collaborated. I annoyed the shit out of him by saying, make Replicache simple, super simple. Like I just kept saying like,
that's honest. I like it.
I just kept saying like, I love PouchDB, but it's got all these problems. I loved Meteor, but it had all these problems. I loved, RethinkDB, but it had all these problems. I just kind of was like, I love this stuff, which was cool for him, I think, in a way. Like it's always fun to have someone that is into the weird tech that you're into. And then I just had my strong opinions of like make it simple, and they were they were exploring all that stuff already, so I get zero credit. Hey, but yeah, so like they were exploring all that, but they did, to Aaron's credit. Yeah, too many, I think. That was the whole genesis of the one name, obviously, was they named it Zero, and I one day had the genius idea to see if I could get that package, and then the Dan Meyer, who I reached out to just randomly, he hadn't updated it in like 8 years, and I was like, this is what I'm building, and he just gave it to me. Super generous. I think that was awesome of him.
What a guy! That's really fantastic.
Yeah, huge. Really, really cool for him to do that, and I really appreciated that. And I think it made all the difference in the world. Like, just because it's so cool too, because it's such a good name, right? Like it encapsulates so many things about the project, doing simplifying two things into one, and it plays off 0 to 1. And so like, I mean, I don't know how it all feels so serendipitous between like living next to each other and working on these things, but I hope it all works out. Sometimes it sounds good, but doesn't work out. But I do think like, yeah, I mean, I don't know where we're at exactly with all that, but the SPA, the SSR, like, yeah. And I just kind of, yeah, I don't know actually where we are with all that, but that's sort of like a lot of background with kind of 0 and 1 and kind of coming. I think the render modes. I feel like I left some point out there, but yeah, I
Well,
appreciate you coming
that
up
is
with that one.
fascinating to me because basically what one is a lot of other good projects all getting blended together. Like you're standing on the shoulders of so much other previous work, and some of that work is yours. And like any other JavaScript library, you end up using a lot of other people's work too. I love how that's just always been part of our ecosystem. But it's also interesting to me because when I saw your video that announced the whole thing, I thought one felt like it was completely connected here, like you were one team. I'm sorry, 0 felt like it was part of one team. Again, for those that following along, 1 is the React framework we're talking about on this show. 0 is coming soon, and it's going to basically create a local first-ish type of setup, depending on how you define local first. So I'm hedging my phrasing a little bit. Side note, I want to draw people's attention to an awesome podcast that localfirst.fm talks about this very topic, getting a lot of
Mhm.
attention. Anyway, I've really been enjoying it, and there's a lot of nuance in this area, but I'm increasingly seeing a lot of people that are just very excited about this idea of local first. So I think you're onto something here. Now, let's talk
Yeah.
about the controversial piece though, because I don't know if people actually caught it, but you more or less aren't bullish about the future of React server components, which is particularly interesting given your history with Vercel and how much Vercel is all in on RSC now, how much you go
Yeah.
to the React docs and the React docs basically say, go use Next.js and you've got to use a
Mhm.
framework. And I feel like they're a little too opinionated on that front right now. But can you give me a sense? RSC will never be supported in one. Is that something that you would claim, or do you see a future where you might?
I think one hard part about talking about RSC is that it is a bunch of different things. Like it isn't just one thing. It is actually, there's sort of server functions, I guess now. There's the server directives, there's the server components, but there's also, so I think there's also choices that you can make above that. Like there, you don't I see it as almost a low level thing that maybe if you abstracted it right, it seems like the remix guys are maybe even looking at that in a way. I don't know what they're going to end up doing with server components, but for example, loaders are sort of half of that, or in a sense, part of that, that this sort of like bringing data into the front end in a simple way that feels natural. So I, I think that like having the router on your server side is bad for user experience if you want. And I think there's maybe ways that you could again abstract that and work towards that. And I don't doubt that the React team, they're full of geniuses, and I'm sure that in the long run they'll probably achieve a lot of
Okay,
simplifying and
I
fixing
got to
this all.
push a little bit here though, because like that's a
Yeah,
big
yeah,
statement. Routing on the
yeah.
server is bad. Help me understand what your justification
For
is.
for a few reasons, soft bad. Like it's more like if you have your router on your client, then when you go to navigate to a new page, you can load the shell of that page instantly, at least. And if you think about a native app, let's say you have a stack view or something like that, or you have, I always think about my food rating app that I think we touched on very briefly, but um, there's a common flow. You land on the home page, you click into a search results page. Let's say you land on the home page, it says like top best tacos in your city. You click the top best tacos and it loads a search page, right? And then you have the search page there and you click the search page to go to a detail of one of the restaurants, right? So you've got your flow. That's a very natural flow that most people hit. And what we had in the app, and this isn't even local first really, it was just like if you design your app, I think in a way that's kind of smart, uh, you have that data cached, right? You have the query when you hit the home page. You query for the top tacos and show that results. Well, when you click into the search page, as long as you're doing this in a way that you've abstracted this in a way, you can show that instantly. You can instantly route into the search page, animate it in, as though it was always loaded there, like a native app. This is what native apps do, and this is kind of why we did that with our app, was because we were building a native app, so it was obvious to us that this was the right way to do things. And then you even further, those search results have a lot of the partial filled in data already for the detail page. You have the image, you have the title, you have the rating, you have the comments count, you have the short description. And so what we did there is, again, you can animate in, which is really nice. Like, it feels amazing, like Google Maps almost. Like, if you think about Google Maps, like, there's no page navigation, there's no like wait when you click that result to go into the detail page. And so this is why I also said you can definitely probably do this with server components, but you have to then like preload the route and do a bunch of logic and like it's just, to me, it's again, you're having to think about the server boundary. So on a DX side, I think it's not as intuitive. And then you're also having to sort of do, I think, a lot more sort of work on the framework side. Whereas like we just built this ourselves, and it was very simple to build this sort of like these flows where you don't always hit them, but you do actually hit them in, I think, very, very common cases. Like I hit a search page and I go to a detail page, like almost everyone's going to hit that flow, and it makes for this great experience. So you can push back. I mean, maybe it is more easy than I think. And again, like I think maybe they'll figure out abstractions and kind of like people will make that work at the framework level. So you don't even have to think about it. I don't doubt the Next.js team. But I did push back. Like when they were talking about React Server components internally at Vercel, when I was there, I actually legitimately said my piece, and I said, I don't know. I mean, like, tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me that I'm missing something. But to me, it's so much complexity.
Once they decided, that's what I'm picturing. It's just a fun story.
There's all this like history with me and Vercel too, because there's like this whole CSS and JS thing that Guillermo and I had like a little. We actually resolved everything, which is cool. Guillermo and I had a chat, and I think we're on good terms. But like, there's a whole other history there with like, because of server components, because of TurboBack, I think they wanted to rightly sort of like get people off of CSS and JS. Maybe I'm going into a tangent, but like CSS and JS, without the new generation like Tamagui that has the compiler that does optimize at build time, it is bad for performance, but it's also hard to implement for a new sort of like bundler. And I think they started this whole campaign. So anyways, there was like these resentments, but none of them were real. Actually, when I left Vercel on good terms, I just decided I was feeling a little burnt out just from like doing Tamagui and Vercel at the same time for so long. So no, I left on good terms. And I love a lot of the people there. I've got like a lot of good friends, or a few good friends at least. I definitely have a few. The remote first culture, async first culture was a little like, I didn't get to spend as much time as I would have liked with like kind of teammates and stuff. But anyways, I'm not trying to turn this into some sort of thing. I actually respect Vercel quite a lot, and like what I'm trying to get to too with server components is I think that they're fine and they have their use cases, but I do think that like there's a lot. I mean, I think it's hard to deny that there's a lot of concepts that you've got to put together and learn. There's a lot of hooks that they've been introducing, right? There's this use optimistic hook. And again, that's where I think local first kind of is smart, because you don't need that hook at all. It comes for free with the use query. You just use query and then you just call like a mutate like you normally would. And you don't have to think about the server. You don't have to think about optimistic. The optimistic comes for free. Maybe we can use that hook under the hood somehow. I'm not sure if there's like some sort of potential for rollback, but
for that matter,
you don't have server boundaries and all that. Yeah.
Isn't it also true then, assuming that I'm using 0 along with 1, I probably wouldn't have any loading spinners or skeleton screens, because again, I'm writing local, so it's all going to be instantaneous. So there's a set of work that just disappears. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say that it's 100% gone. I mean, but yes, in a lot of cases, that is why people I think are excited about it, is like, you don't like, yeah, exactly. You don't need to be like, there's so much effort into suspense and all these like loading states and all that stuff. And you'll need that because you're always going to have to deal with the network at some amount, like your first load, a lot of times you have to wait for that sync to come in if it has some data existing. If it's a huge, like you're searching or something, right? Like, you're doing a search query that needs to go to the server to do a big search. Like obviously you're going to need to have loaders and stuff like that. So it isn't like this magical thing that solves all problems, but it does actually get you very, very close to where for most cases and 0, to prop them up a little bit, they're doing it in such smart ways. Like they granularly listen to the Postgres change feed. So they react to your Postgres. They're not doing some sort of weird sync engine on top. It's actually just reacting to Postgres. So if you go in and delete in Postgres, it will sync to all your clients instantly, right? So like, I think that's a really cool
Whoa.
feature. Yeah,
You're
that's
saying
something
like
that people.
I could write SQL and it just
Yes,
after
real
that
time.
executes.
Yeah,
Oh, that is
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
I didn't
That's
realize
cool.
that. Okay.
Yeah. I'm good at pitching zero at this point. I'm getting better at it, but like this is huge, I think. Okay, the second thing that's really cool is that the syncs are granular and not a lot. This is what Aaron told me. He knows a lot more, but he told me that not a lot of these local first type libraries actually do fully granular syncing. What they do is essentially rerun all the queries in the view or rerun every query that's active in the page or something like that. So they'll actually just, oh, something changed. Let's rerun all these queries, send the new results down. But actually zero is fully granular. So it knows that you mutated this specific thing and it knows in advance which queries are going to be affected by that and just updates those. And it does that on both sides actually, which is pretty cool. They just did this. They originally were going to make the server side a little bit dumber. So where the server, because obviously you have zero running on the server in front of your Postgres and you have it running in the client on your browser. And originally to simplify things a little bit, they had this design where the server was a little bit dumber. The server just kind of like reran heavier things because the assumption was your server can do that. I think they started doing load testing and stuff and just thought like, you know what, let's just bite the bullet and let's make it do both. So on both sides of the equation, it's using the same kind of intelligent, like, kind of syncing logic where it knows that mutations are coming in. They're only affecting these queries and it's only rerunning that and sending results back for those queries. So that's another I think, very cool thing, maybe a little bit lower level, but very, very cool aspect of zero. And then, yeah, I
So
think
Nate, we've been talking
those are two
about
of the big ones. Yeah.
we've been talking about zero a lot on here, even though
Yeah.
we were supposed to just talk about one. And I totally
Yep.
understand it because a lot of what zero's going to give us is this really remarkable experience working with React. Like we don't right now have anything that I'm aware of that just a framework that has these opinions. You could go, for instance, tack Replicache on to your React project and I think get something fairly similar to zero. Is that fair? And in fact, zero, I believe, is even using something like Replicache behind the scenes. Is that true?
Zero's a lot more, but when zero's out, you can plug it in anywhere too. So I think that analogy holds that zero is pluggable anywhere. I think I see where you're going, but go. I'll let you if you want to like poke in on some specific part of that.
Well, what I had read, I thought I'd read it in your guys' docs that zero is more or less using Replicache behind the scenes, or to some degree going
Yes.
to replace Replicache.
Replace, yeah. I would say it's Replicache plus quite a bit more in a sense, because Replicache was mostly a sync engine. It had some storage, but you had to figure out a lot of conflict resolution. You had to glue together the nice querying syntax, and you had to like just do a lot more. Basically, it was sort of like a lower level. It's like you can imagine that they basically built zero on top of Replicache's work, but it's like double or something the amount of like sort of like what it's giving you out of the box or something like that. I would say. I don't know.
Yeah. So effectively, once zero is done, I'll be in a situation where I just pull it in, and these decisions are made for me. There's lots of opinions, and I think it really goes well. The part of what I think is making one really exciting to me is if I pick one, I've got all these decisions made for me. And man, it is a lot of decisions. And I like a lot of the decisions you guys have made. And I think in many cases you have looked around at other frameworks and said, those are good ideas I'm going to take. It's not like you guys just ignored everyone. You took a lot of good ideas from others. Now, I think the real question is, at what point do we have potentially too much opinion built in where people feel like, oh, this is actually too heavy. Yeah. Now, I want to point out to people, though, who may not know this. When you create an app with one, something that you guys did that I like is I get to decide what's in the box. I can say I just want the minimal setup. I can say whether I want Tamagui in there. And then I could also select what's called full stack. And once I select full stack, you guys throw the whole kitchen sink in there. And then I get biome and I get... well, presumably at some point I will get zero, but the things that I also get right now is a Docker container. It assumes that I'm going to use Postgres and probably some other stuff I'm forgetting. What else comes in that full stack soup?
Yeah. So this is good, I think, to clear a lot of stuff up, I think. And yeah, we've got a lot of explaining to do. I mean, these full stack frameworks are just so frameworks are just so, they do so much these days. So it's kind of interesting to cover it, right? But yeah, I think, okay, so first of all, one right now is actually quite unopinionated. It has these loaders from Remix, right? That's kind of like our base level. I thought we found that necessary because we ported the tamagui.dev website over from Next, and it's just like, okay, we have to have a feature that's somewhat like this, or else we can't build the site, and we're not doing server components, right? So like, that would have been a huge amount of complexity for us to implement on terms of like just in the framework level. I think one of our theories is like we save a lot of effort by not implementing that. So that frees us up to do all this other stuff, which I think will be interesting in a more vertically integrated way. And that is our take.
Wait, I didn't catch that. But, you said you said we saved a lot of work by not implementing that. When you say that, you
server
mean
components.
What? Server components. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Like as a framework author, it saves us a lot of work. Maybe in the future it gets easier, but there is a lot like at the Vite level, it's quite, they're doing hard things to make those work. And so we save a lot of complexity, but we did need something like loaders, right? So that we could actually make server side data loading quite efficient and shake out all the dependencies and all that stuff. So, or at least like, I think it's kind of table stakes at this point, but then sort of getting into the more like vertical, is it that opinionated? Like, should I consider it? Here's my take is, and I tried to kind of say this in some of our marketing, but here's my take is, opting in and out of zero is a Boolean, and it adds no weight if you don't want it. So if you want something that is just like a Remix or a Next, one is just that. You can just use your Tailwind, your div, you can just target web. You will have nothing different in terms of weight or complexity or like kind of like from a Next.js, let's say, or from a Remix. Like it will basically be very much on the level of abstraction, the level of kind of like of problem solving as both of those frameworks out of the box. We have this Boolean flag for zero. What that's doing is essentially we've been building out the server side handoff and server side like and sort of like this way to query without waterfalling, which we're working with them on, to have like your queries co-located with your components so that you can then compose them into one big query, which is very important. Again, this is kind of coming back to the web performance thing, but it is very important for the web, I think, to have performance to be able to have all your queries not waterfall down the tree as you load data, have them be all interpretable. I think React has this term like render as you fetch or something, or fetch as you render, I think, something like that. There's so many different ways to put this, like waterfalls and all this stuff. But essentially, like you want to be able to figure out your data query before you render. And to do that, you need to be able to statically roughly know your data query outside of your React tree. But at the same time, you want to be able to have your queries, I think, co-located with your components. I mean, this is like, again, this is what Tailwind and Tamagui and all these style libraries kind of figured out. It's like you really want to have your abstractions be at the component level and have all your stuff at the component level so you can reason about it in like that one block. And I think that
a huge point. Like this is the thing where you guys basically are offering people the sort of experience that you get with Relay, for instance, where you are truly co-locating and also running queries in parallel, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. These are hard problems. Like, co-locating, but also running everything at once alongside your render. Like these are the two things that I worked with the Zero team to kind of like try and figure out over a period of time. And we did, I think we landed on a really awesome, simple version of it. I think there's even better versions in terms of like types maybe we're sort of playing with, but like I do think that this version that we have now is really great. And it is credit to them for having subqueries that you can just chain, like you can just do a sub at any point and then give it a subquery and then it can essentially like keep building off of that. And so that works really well with the React model where you have subcomponents. And so you sort of like export your query, your component, and then you chain them. And so like right now there's a little bit of manual work, which is similar to Relay. In Relay, you have to like spread your fragments and import them and put them together. But I think we can get better at that too. So to where like, I mean, who knows, even in the future, maybe I love compilers. So there could be some smart version that you don't have to do any work. But anyways, I'm getting into the weeds because I'm obviously been deep into this. But I think on a high level, if someone's just kind of looking at this and deciding like, if you want zero, what we're going to do is just make it very well integrated. We're not going to be I do mention Rails a bit. We're not going to be as opinionated as Rails. Like I don't think we want to be controlling your job system, your mailing system, your, like I just don't think we want to include all that. The modern world, just there's too much money, there's too much complexity, there's too much like things going on that like I don't think we can do that. It's also why we're not zero. Like it's also why I really like that. It's like we are taking a little bit of a stance on one piece, which is the data piece. And I think it's such a huge value add if you are opinionated on data. And I can sort of talk a little bit to that. It's maybe interesting to poke into like how that could, because I think you're not even seeing the benefits, I think, quite yet, of what a framework can give you if it understands your data schema, it understands your data model, it understands how to query your data. It's actually like we've been kind of noodling on this, and I've just been getting excited because I just really think that this is like, there's some huge breakthroughs in terms of like productivity, developer experience. I mean, like, and I won't be so coy about it, but like one example I think that's really interesting is, like if you're thinking about tooling and dev tools, one thing that you always need are these admin tools, these internal tools that like you want to have like an interface for exploring your production data, editing things, banning a user or whatever, marking them as something, so searching through your records. And so I think that like what we could do is give you these like amazing primitives that just come out of the box that you could just quickly put together your entire, internal tools infrastructure, because we know your schema, we know your zero querying, and we can make it very seamless to just run these tools and have like nice abstractions with 0 and 1. I mean, it almost comes already because once you have 0 and 1, it's like just put an auth screen in front of a thing. But we want to make we kind of think that there's like a lot of innovation that can be had there in terms of just kind of, there's a lot. It's kind of very cool, but I'll try and speak about that when I have more to concretely talk about. But needless to say, the reason that we're sort of taking this half full stack, I wish I could maybe coin that, like something like half full stack, which is like, we don't want to do all that other stuff, like jobs and all that stuff. We do include Drizzle. I'm thinking of making that maybe like highly recommended because like it's nice for us to understand your schema and be able to do migrations. But again, I don't think we're going to be as strongly opinionated on that. And also you can even unplug zero. So again, like, and ultimately we are just a framework that is somewhat unopinionated. I just think that like if you buy in to zero and you like it, we're going to make that really great. And that's kind of our perspective.
So it's fascinating how much we've talked about zero in here. It's a lot more than I expected. And I think the weird spot that you guys are in right now is zero's going to be coming sometime next year from what I read. Is that still your
alpha should be soon? They say in 2 weeks, public alpha.
Okay, but realistically
probably stable
sometime in 25. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, is it worth me picking up one today, or should I be waiting for zero to show up first?
Yeah. Well, that's part of the reason that we put together the full stack the way we did, is that was actually extracted from our zero demo, because zero does need Postgres. That is the one thing that it's opinionated on, is that it's all only on Postgres. So that's why we set up. And actually, the way that they
realize that.
Help me understand.
Postgres. Why does it have to be tied to Postgres? I would think that other RDBMSs theoretically could plug into this paradigm.
I think they could. I think they could even just do like SQLite, but I think that the fact that they can listen to the change feed and react to that simplified a lot of their server-side logic.
Okay, because they're effectively hitting Postgres APIs, presumably.
For some of the server sides, I think it simplifies their server-side syncing engine quite a lot to be able to just lean onto Postgres. And if they do that in an unopinionated way, I think they have to basically implement a whole like layer on top that kind of abstracts that and then plugs into different databases. It's just a lot of. I think they're just let's make Postgres. I think is safe enough of a thing that like you're not going to get everyone, but it's pretty safe, I think, and that's what I like about. I like that it is Postgres at least. But I mean, it would be cool. I think there's some people talking in the chat about like maybe we can do SQLite or something like that. That'd be kind of cool. And like I think Aaron said that like you probably could put it together. It's not the biggest piece of zero, but they're not going to do that for you. But I do think we've talked about it quite a bit, and the question is like, is it worth it using outside? And I think so. I mean, like again, like I think I have many hard problems. Like you said, is it good at web only, or is it only for universal? Is it good without zero or with zero? Like again, I think it's good if you want to move very fast and have this like you want to really like again. I think our value pitch. Why another framework? Like don't make another framework, or I don't want to be too hostile. If you're making a framework, have fun with it. Do what you want. But like if you want to make your framework stand out, I think that like trying to deliver something that genuinely kind of moves forward significant pieces of like developer experience. And I think especially DX and UX, right? Like both. You want the code to be better and you want the experience. You don't want to sacrifice, right? And I do think that that's where one, with a lot of the decisions we've made with, render modes, with like kind of like unifying web and native, I think we really are making kind of UX much easier to pull off in a way. And DX, I think with Zero and with kind of taking this a stance against, not against, but like not, by the way, I would like to adopt some of server components. I think that you can abstract it and implement some pieces of it in a very nice way that are very simple. And so that's what I would like to do. So I would love to use server components, and I fully support the, that movement and the React team in doing that. But I just think that, like, again, we're sort of trying to take a unique angle that I think is very valuable for a certain type of person. Maybe you're a smaller team that wants to just move very fast. Maybe you're a big team, but you just you agree with if you're a big team that agrees with our decisions, I think you'll absolutely love it and you'll move very, very fast. If you're a small team that wants to just you want to focus on quality of your product and not have to make 100 decisions and really get some very modern tooling. If you're willing to deal with a little bit of risk, I think at least over the next few months, then I think we're also that's a very strong, kind of use case for us. And so we have to stabilize. I think web feels really stable to me. There's a couple little things like our 404 pages still aren't fully working. So you get a 404, but it's you're not showing the content yet. That's a bug that I want to fix this week. Pretty small, but I think the web is it's very far along. We build to production. We give you a Hono server. We give you it's fully self-hostable with one command. It's really sweet, actually. It gives you SSR, SSG, and SPA end to end, mixed anywhere in your thing. I think this is really cool that it just works today. And I really do think you can build kind of incredible, especially if you have maybe a use case where you are building part of your app is very much a logged in dashboard. You want to save a lot of complexity of server side rendering, but keep your typed routing. And then at the same time, you have a few marketing pages. Again, I think that's maybe another case where I'd say that's a really strong use case today. Hopefully by next year, when Zero stabilizes and is out of public beta, and when we are out of beta, I hope that we can prove that we are a great choice for a lot of things. I want to be really, really great at some chunk of things and not everything, but focus a bit more on integrated high quality and sacrifice maybe a little bit of the ecosystem. Okay, yeah, you can unplug and do your own thing, but you are going your own way. But if you do agree with these things, you like this sort of vision for things, we want to just have fun and make that really good.
I also really like that you guys are allowing people to say, all right, I want some of your opinions, but maybe not all of them. And I think you could maybe even go farther with what you are right now. Because right now, when I create an app via one, I end up getting 3 options, but I can see how you could even go in and let people go more a la carte in the future as things progress. That I just really like that idea, because now you're letting some people sort of select in on pieces. I did read an interesting critique, and I'm just curious how you would take it. Somebody had claimed that now we're in a world where AI can move so quickly that maybe the idea of a highly opinionated framework is making less sense, because couldn't we just have an AI stand up a lot of the boilerplate for us? How would you respond to that? Do you see any credence to it?
Were they one of your friends? Because I'll have to decide. No, I'm just kidding.
This is no one that I know. So obviously, you and I think, are on the same page here. I mean, I don't want to be mean about it, but I read it and I thought that again, it presumes that
is not good. I think specifically at high, a lot of things. I think it's very good at making me a lot faster when I know what I want and it's been done before. Because AI is if it's in the training set roughly, and I know what I want, AI makes me a lot more effective. If on an architectural, a deep architectural level, on a user experience high level, very much caring about I actually really struggle to get it to do things really well, at a high end, because it is trained in a way that's on everything, and it sort of does give you this well, here's the most popular answers roughly. You know, like you're going to end up in this sort of like space where everyone else is and also where all the popular answers are, but it almost never gives me the best. It almost never gives me the best version of something. It gives me a decent version, and then I'm able to clean it up because, you know, I know that area at least. So like again, if I know the area, it helps me a lot because I can sort of like guide it and then also clean it up at the end. But yeah, I'm not too worried. I mean, you know, I hope they keep innovating there and make some breakthroughs and take me out of a job, I guess. Like, I don't know. I mean, let's just get this over with. But like until then, I don't think that I like your idea though. Like I do think this sort of flexible starting point, it could be interesting for us to maybe instead of just giving a bunch of presets, go more of like there's one create flow, but you do get to choose each step of the way. That could be a nice maybe way to put it. So we'll have to keep working on that. But yeah, I mean, I'd be curious your take on that AI thing.
Yeah, I think you and I largely agree. I don't see it as a obvious solution at this point either for this particular problem. I'm generally, I would say, optimistic about a lot of things in the AI space, but this just wasn't an area that I thought necessarily reflected either. So you and I, sounds like, agree. Okay, so I want to honor your time. I've actually kept you past time too. So Nate, this was a really helpful conversation for me. And I've got to say, I've only had a few days to work with one, but I'm really excited about what you guys are doing. I really do think it's unique. I would encourage people to check it out. In particular, I mean, it's obviously something to look at if you're somebody that's doing native and web together. And I like how, Kinsey Dodds actually tweeted this out today talking about, remember when React Native came out and everybody was talking about, you're learning how to write once with this one technology, but we weren't necessarily expecting that we were going to have one project that contained web and native together. Like this is a novel idea and native's been around a long time. And by native, I mean React Native. But so I do think it's really interesting. Like I read a couple people claiming that they're seeing somewhere in the realm of 90% code sharing between native and web, and you're nodding your head. Is that, I mean, that sounds fantastic. And you think about a lot of teams right now that might have this separation. Boy, if you have it in one project like this, that strikes me as very attractive. So I think that's well worth looking at. A lot of other things that you mentioned, the file-based routing really works nicely. I understood that right away. You have a little bit of a different convention than some others. This is a little sidebar, but what I would love to see is a standard in file-based routing where we all agree on a syntax. Because for me, jumping between Next.js and Remix and now one and this, everybody's got these weird nuances, and I assume that you diverged for reasons, but that's a little
well, we
paper cut.
like I said, we did specifically the file system routing structure is the biggest part that we kept from Expo Router around, because again, a part of it was like, well, why would we just diverge for no reason? Like we're not trying to hide that we like are benefiting from some of their work there, and again, like I do think we've done so much around that and different, and we've done a lot differently ultimately, and they are doing server components and stuff. So I think there'll be a very clear choices between there, and I'm glad for that. You know, I'm not trying to step on that, but I do think that like, yeah, we didn't want to diverge from that just for the sake of it, because it's like, well, at least if you're building a universal app, you have some. So that is part of the justification too, was like, I thought it was a pretty decent setup there. It's got a lot of the similar concepts. I agree with you, man. I did a lot of research because, it's like, oh, I get to build a file system router. Like it's kind of interesting. It's like, well, let me see if I can fix this, or let me see if I can do something different. And ultimately, I didn't see, a way to sort of like, well, one, I didn't see it. I mean, I think the big thing we have is the render modes where you do plus SSG, plus SSR. I think that was my kind of like contribution, I guess, there was to come up with that and implement that. And I think that's pretty cool. But beyond that, I'll keep thinking about it. I went back and forth, like, should we do dot page? Because like there's some benefits with dot page, but I actually found that like if you're co-locating, like I actually don't sort of like, I mean, again, dude, this is one of those topics, right, where everyone has their little opinions and whatever. And so we just try to keep it simple, and I won't even go too much further into there. I will say about the code sharing thing, because that's super interesting to me, which is that I worked at Uniswap after Vercel. And I think Uniswap, if you want a really good example, open source project, the code is on GitHub, Uniswap's GitHub/Uniswap/interface. I worked there for a year and a half. They moved to Tamagui. We migrated their entire mobile app. they launched an extension, which is actually sharing, I would say 90% of the code with the mobile app. It's a web Chrome extension that lives in your sidebar. It has all the same features for the most part as the mobile app. And now the web app is starting. The web app is a Create React app, sort of legacy big spa that they had like 3 different styling solutions. Now they have 4 with Tamagui. Slowly getting rid of that. I think they were very close to getting rid of like one of them, and the other one's just CSS, but like I guess it counts. But like they are migrating to Tamagui. We converted the homepage, the token details page, like kind of the big pages are migrated over, and the swap widget now is shared between all 3. So actually 4, I guess you can say, like iOS, Android, extension browser, and web site all are sharing the token selector and the swap widget, which is the 2 biggest parts of their app, are 100% code shared between all 3 platforms. And I think that's a huge achievement. I'm very proud of that. And I think it's really cool, actually. Like, and it really helped them because they had this web app that had like 3 different features that weren't on mobile. Mobile had like 2 features that weren't on web. They had this roadmap to like implement those features and this and that. And then I think one day, actually, it's kind of funny, like one of the younger guys at the company, we were sort of slowly, I was kind of being careful. I'm not trying to like risk my job by trying to push them to share all their code, but I was slowly getting there. And then I think one day a young guy was like, hey, they want me to do this ticket to like share, to like implement this feature that's already on native, the swap widget on native, but implement it on web. He's like, how hard do you think it would be for me to just like pull that in, since we've been sort of getting very close to being able to do that lately? We sort of fixed all the last issues, and so we were starting to explore that. And he's like, do you think I could just do it? And I was like, I don't know, but you could give it a try. And he came back, like, to his credit, he came back like that week, after that weekend on the next Monday. I think it was like a Friday. It was one of those things where it was like, I think he just like wanted to play around with it, and it was like a Friday. And on Monday he came back, he had the swap widget loading on web imperfectly, but I think management saw that and was like, cool. And so it launched. I think they launched that not that long ago. Yeah. So it was like it took a couple months of like, really making sure it all worked well and everything like that. But I am a big believer. I think like you don't want to share everything. And one does let you diverge. You can do platform specific extensions at any file, even conditionally inside any file. So I do highly encourage you to, use the platform.
Oh, even inside,
for especially the high level.
I thought it was just file level.
You can do, well, Tamagui has style level, so you can target platforms on a style level, but you can also there's Tamagui exports these helpers, but you could also implement them yourselves, which is like is web, is iOS, is Android. You can do that.
Okay.
You'll bring a little bundle size. So like technically on the web, you sort of want to, at least you can do also process.m.target, this whole target thing to get it to actually have a no bundle size inline conditional, but we need to document all that. But yeah, you can do a bit of that as well. But yeah, I think like, I'm not trying to say you should share 100% of code, maybe even not 90%, but I do think that if you haven't been in React Native in the last like 3 years, it's come a long way. And I think it's much, much more possible now.
Awesome. Okay. So closing, where should people go if they want to follow you and they want to learn more?
I yap a lot. Nate Birdman, that's my middle name, Birdman on Twitter. It's actually my middle name. So that's my Twitter handle.
Birdman?
Yeah, it's my mom's last name.
That's cool.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
When I saw it, I assumed it was a reference to Twitter. And I thought, well, now your name is old. Now you got to be Nate X. But yeah.
That's hilarious. I never even put that together. It was hilarious. Okay. But yeah, no, it was just the handle that was available. So, and then onestack.dev is the one website, obviously. And
yes,
and so
I will tell you, I've already learned that Googling for help on one is useless. I would go one and then this. I'm like, yeah.
Yes. We're trying to make one.js the Google part. So if you do want to Google it or you want to write an article, try and include one.js and React. I think if you want React, you can always probably do that. And eventually we just launched, so I don't think we have much Google juice, but yeah.
Give it time.
It's a good point.
You'll get there. All right. Well, Nate, this was fantastic. I love what you guys are doing. I wish you all the best. Thank you for coming on the show. And everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, please click like and subscribe. That really helps. And if your team's working in React, I can help. You can find me at reactjsconsulting.com. Happy coding.